For those of you that weren't able to join us, I'm here just to lead in and set the stage of what AI Dash does, how we leverage satellite technology and artificial intelligence, and apply that to grid solutions such as we did with National Grid. So to begin, I'm here to talk first about the satellite imagery types that we use. If you're like me and you think back about 5-10 years ago, my understanding of satellite imagery was going to Google Earth or Google Maps and seeing the car that was in my front yard from 10 years ago. But I'm here today to tell you that's not the case. What you're looking at on this slide are 3 different imagery types that we've leveraged throughout the past 50 years because satellites have been perpetually in orbit for over 50 years. On the left-hand side, we have 1 meter imagery from the Sentinel-1 satellite. In the middle, we have 30 centimeter imagery that we're currently leveraging today. And on the right-hand side, we have what's to come, which will be commercially viable in 2024, which is 10 centimeter resolution imagery. So the imagery resolutions that we've had over time have drastically increased and only continue to do so. But it's not just the resolution that matters when it comes to satellite imagery and technology. It's the bands of the imagery that we're using. So we leverage multispectral and SAR, which stands for synthetic aperture radar imagery today. What this looks like, if we look at the left-hand side in the image that we see, there's different bands that we measure, which measure light refraction and light kickback, so they can give us insights into things like chlorophyll content of the vegetation, overall tree and vegetation health, carbon loading, wildfire risk, and a multitude of other temporal views. On the right-hand side, you'll see an image with a cloud and then an image without a cloud, and you're wondering, well, what is that? And that's actually synthetic aperture radar in use. So one of the big myths and stigmas that I once had was satellite technology is only going to apply when we have beautiful, no clouds, great weather. But that's not the case. We leverage SAR today to pierce through clouds and obtain the same insights that we would with traditional multispectral imagery. And this can be tasked during a storm, to pierce through a hurricane, for example. This can be used at night to figure out what's going on at the ground, and a multitude of other factors getting into even soil conditions. Some of the big takeaways right now, the cadence of satellite technology and imagery available, almost every point on Earth is available within 24 hours. In about 2 years, we imagine every point on Earth will be available in every hour. So the cadence of these are increasing quickly. Again, we're using that 30 to 50 centimeter band, which equates out to a 12-inch resolution. When we have that 10 centimeter imagery, again, coming in about 2024, that's going to be a 4-inch resolution. That's also going to bring some different multitude of effects that we can leverage, not just multispectral imagery, also hyperspectral imagery. So rolling all of this together, AI-IBMS leverages an artificial intelligence system to take all this data, including historical imagery, with new imagery today, and applies that to utility solutions such as vegetation management. At a very high level, how this works is with satellite technology, we can correct GIS shape files, which you see on the left-hand side, to get them geospatially referenced and correct from the conductor. Using that historical imagery, typically 3 to 5 years back, we're able to understand how vegetation has changed. We're actually observing those growth rates. So for example, the tree in my backyard is likely going to grow a little bit different than the tree down the road due to different conditions. We're able to pinpoint those exact pixels and those exact trees to understand what is the growth rate that we're seeing. This can be equated back to when that was last trimmed or when there was some storm or different types of change detection. But ultimately, we're getting a very accurate growth rate of the piece of vegetation that we're looking at. Next, we take that encroachment and clearance, geospatially referenced from the corrected shapefile, to understand what is the encroachment distance from all these conductors and how is that going to change over time. And lastly, calculate and project forward with that growth modeling to understand across an entire network, whether that's distribution or transmission, what are my conditions looking like today and how is that going to change over time so I can optimize things like my cycle prune plans. Just to get a little more in depth with some of that growth modeling, one thing to understand too is with the satellite technology that we use a technique called Stereoscopic Acquisition, which is essentially taking multiple shots of the same area of interest on Earth from different angles in orbit, which allows us to triangulate that. And that gives us 2 things. That helps us understand a 3-dimensional tree or vegetation height. That also helps us understand the radial clearance. So not just the distance from the conductor on a flat 2-dimensional plane, but a three-dimensional radial clearance. As we can imagine, vegetation does not grow at a fixed rate to one side laterally or horizontally. There's a lot of different effects. So we're measuring radial clearances as we do this, as well as with tree height. And ultimately, AI Dash is currently deployed on almost 60 customers. And what our IVMS solution has done is improved reliability from 5 to 15%, helped utilities reduce their vegetation management budget by unlocking efficiencies from 10 to 20%. And the big advantage of satellite technology over other remote sensing techniques is it can go live very quickly to the tune of sometimes 4 to 8 weeks. So I have Bert here on the call, and we want to set the stage on some reliability metrics. This is going to be common knowledge for a lot of you, but we want to set the stage because this is going to be very important as we reference back into some of the later insights Bert's going to be presenting. So Bert, I would like to bring you on to talk about some of the 3 common reliability metrics that I know you leverage, such as SAFE, SAIDI, and CAIDI. Can you kind of tell me, what do these mean from your perspective, and how do you look at these?
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. So with regard to SAFE, SAIDI, and CAIDI, kind of those are the common 3, the big 3, right? And the metric calculation is consistent no matter where you are. The targets and how they developed, however, can differ from utility to utility, and for like National Grid, it can differ from service company to service company and state to state. And I'll give you an example of that. So in Massachusetts, SAIDI and SAFE are really our primary reliability targets, right? Those are our service quality standards. They're developed from a 10-year period from 1995 to 2004. So some time ago, targets set long ago. However, not only those targets set a long time ago, but our regulators also had the foresight to institute glide path. And that glide path makes those targets a little bit tougher to meet every 3 years. So for example, our SAIDI target in Massachusetts will drop in 2025 by about 6.5 minutes. And SAFE will also drop as well. So I would say they want to hold the utility accountable to maintain service, and not only maintain service for our customers, but improve service as well. So in Rhode Island, again, the 2 common ones are SAFE and SAIDI. Those are based on service quality targets set by our state regulators. Those have remained unchanged since 2007. And then, of course, we have New York. New York is slightly different. They have a service quality standard, SAFE, but they use CAIDI as well, not SAIDI, right? And that's determined through our system performance and periodically reviewed through our rate filings or rate cases. And I'll give you an example of how that's reviewed. In 2018, we were able to demonstrate the severity of the more frequent storms that we were experiencing in upstate New York and those impacts. As a result, we were able to make the case to increase the CAIDI target. However, when they give, the regulators take. We had to reduce our safety target as well. So it's important to understand the different targets and how those are calculated and how the targets, frankly, how they differ from state to state. In addition, in Massachusetts, we have 2 additional service quality standards, SAFE and CAIDI. And what those do is they really align with our worst performing feeders, right? The bottom 5% of our feeders, we have about 1,100 feeders in Massachusetts, the bottom 5%, so about 57 for frequency and about 57 for duration. Those are tracked. And if we look at the performance of those feeders, and then a year, whatever's in the bottom 5% go on to a tracker the following year. If those remain at the end of the following year as worst performing feeders, then they go on to a 3rd year. And if they remain at the end of the 3rd year, the company can experience penalties. So, it just provides due diligence on our behalf to say, we're not just focusing on the system performances, but we're also focusing on the individual circuit performances down to the last customer. So real important to understand that.
So Bert, one of the things you mentioned is the difference between the state regulatory agencies between Massachusetts and New York, how one's primarily using SAIDI and the other's using CAIDI. Which one is harder from your experience to actually manage? Do you have a preference, or is it really dependent on the environment?
It really comes down to how your system is configured, right? What are the types of exposures that you have from winds and storms, soil conditions that may cause trees to fail, for example. So it does vary. So for Massachusetts, and to an extent for Rhode Island, for example, we tend to put a little bit more emphasis on our duration, on our SAIDI, because typically year on year that one's a little tougher to meet. Frequency is a little bit easier to obtain. I'm not going to say it's easy, but easier to obtain. So in New York, again, CAIDI and SAFE, typically it can vary, but typically CAIDI tends to be tough. However, year to date this year in New York, safety is kind of the one that's on the bubble, right? It's something we're paying really close attention to because projections are not bad, but a little tighter. So it really does depend on the system, depends on configurations and really how the exposure is set up on the system. It can vary from end to end.
That's great. So before we were talking for this presentation, you also talked to me a little bit about the differences in customer interruptions, right? So it's not just the impact, it's not just that end service customer. There's differences with these customer interruptions, such as sustained and momentary. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's important to understand the difference, right? Because a momentary in one state can be a sustained event.
My part's over, so I'm just watching the chat box as long as nothing goes wrong. So if I hang up real abruptly, you'll know why. But
I think we.
But I'm just sitting here. So yeah.
I think we're someone on mute, but keep continuing, Bert.
Yeah, sure, no problem, Jordan. Yeah, so for mass and round, our momentaries are very consistent, right? Anything that's under 1 minute is considered momentary and not part of the safety metrics. Now in New York, we had a little bit more bandwidth there. Anything under 5 minutes is considered momentary and therefore not part of the KD and safety metrics. So it's really important to understand that. Now, in some utilities and some jurisdictions, they may put far more emphasis on momentaries. We pay attention to it, but it's not a regulatory target. But we are conscientious about momentaries because those are still interruptions that our customers see. Those are events that they still got to reset the clock, and they may find that a nuisance. So that's very important to be cognizant. But really, my point is understand what is the difference within your utility on a difference of a momentary versus sustained event.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important to remember here too, also from our conversation, is in today's world, when you're a customer and oftentimes your home is your office now, sustained and a momentary doesn't matter to that customer, right? It's still an interruption. My Zoom call drops, my internet drops. So ultimately, have you and National Grid factor that in from a customer service and a customer feedback standpoint that we're looking at these metrics to track what's happening, but ultimately, this is still impacting the customer, whether it's momentary or sustained.
Yeah, absolutely. 2.5 years now, a large portion of our customer base are working from home still, right? Their home is their office now. No longer are they going to the office, and if they see a momentary or even a 10-minute interruption at home, they're not really interrupted until they get home to, like I said, set those clocks. Now they are working from home. I'm working from home right now. If my power goes out, that's a real burden. It's a real nuisance. So we're conscientious of that. Our customers' tolerance of those interruptions, frankly, are going down. They want to see good quality, reliable service, whether they're at their workplace, wherever that might be, or their home place.
That's great. And kind of the last thing that I want to talk about, because this plays into some of the data that I know you're going to present later in this presentation as we normalize items like vegetation-related outages and look at unnormalized data. And what are the driving factors there? Storm impacts and what you can do, what you can't do, what's major, what's minor. Can you explore that with us, Bert?
Yeah, so storm impacts and the ability to exclude or if you have to include those is really important. So again, we have three different jurisdictions, 3 different states that we have distribution service companies in, and those vary as well with respect to storm criteria. So in Rhode Island, it follows IEEE methodology, 1366 methodology. And really what that is based on years past, 5 years past, what is that threshold, that the threshold for major event day. And for Rhode Island, for us right now, it's about 6.8 minutes. And any single 24-hour period you have an event in that duration at the system level exceeds that, you can exclude it. Pretty straightforward. Now you look at states like Massachusetts, it's a little tougher to meet the storm criteria. We have to have 15%, that's 15% of our customer base out. Or we can have our governor declare a state of emergency. That's really the only 2 components for the most part that allow us to exclude events. Now, 15% of your customer base, that's a lot. It's for us, it's well over 200,000 customers out. A common number, if you're not using IEEE methodology, a common threshold is typically 10%, not uncommon at all. So 15% is a stretch, and that makes it very, very difficult to obtain. So we've had years where we've had many storms, and they don't come anywhere near that customer threshold of 15%. but yet the impacts are still substantial. So it's really important to understand how those storms play a role with reliability performance, and what is included and what's excluded. But remember, whether it's included or excluded, your customer sees it. So you've got to pay attention to that as well.
I imagine this is becoming more challenging too, as we think about the current state of climate and the current state of our world, that the frequency and severity of storms are just ever so increasing. Is this something that you juggle quite a bit of trying to manage?
Yeah, we do. And any opportunity we can get to educate our regulators as well, and even our municipalities and communities we serve, we try to do that. It is a tough challenge. Again, the impacts are real, but what is also a fair and reasonable level of service that people can expect when the wind's blowing or you get a minor to severe storm that rolls through. So it is also managing expectations as well.
That's great. Well, Bert, I'd like to turn it over to you to talk a little bit of the story between National Grid and AI Dash and what VMO actually stands for. So, Bert, why don't you take the lead?
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. So VMO is National Grid's digital tool for vegetation management. And what VMO means, it's pretty straightforward: vegetation management optimization. That's really the term that we've coined for this digital product. So I think it would help to understand really how National Grid got to where we are. Like most vegetation management programs across utilities in North America, over the last several years, we are seeing contractor rate increases, and for the most part, justifiably so. I can remember 20, 25 years ago, early days of my career in this industry, and especially working closer with our operations and our tree crews in the field. I would see, our qualified tree workers sometimes lead the industry. They go off and maybe work in some other industry for a while. But 9 times out of 10, that person would come back. They'd come back to the utility property, and they'd come back to the vegetation management program. They may come back to the same contractor they left. Maybe they come back to a different one. They change the color of their hat or their shirt, but typically they come back. Today, that is not true. When our qualified workers are leaving the industry, they're gone. It's very unlikely they're coming back. So the ability to retain, recruit, and maintain the necessary complements that our contractors need to deliver our vegetation management programs is a huge undertaking today, like it has never been. So that obviously is driving our costs. As a result, in our Massachusetts jurisdiction, we've seen that we've had to make tough decisions on our maintenance pruning program, whereas we were deferring in one year maybe 100 miles out of our work plan. And then the following year, maybe now we're deferring 200 or 300 miles. And then the following year, 400 miles. As you can see, the snowball effect continues. So as a result, in 2020, early 2020, we were tasked with looking at what are the opportunities out there in the industry, on the market, that we can bring a service solution in to help us optimize the way we do our program, right? Instead of just doing our program on a time-based cycle like in Massachusetts on 5 years, every 5 years a circuit gets pruned, how do we better equip ourselves with data to make the right decisions on which circuits we prune at the right time? So as a result, we reached out to AI Dash and worked with them in the latter part of 2020 to come up with a proof of concept. Now, as Teresa mentioned earlier, I've been in the industry for a little while, and I understand what best management practices are. And a well-funded, cycle-based approach has always been a best practice. So when we did a proof of concept, like most proof of concepts that I've been a part of over the years, you usually pick a small part of your system, and that's where you apply it to, right, to test it out. This proof of concept, we decided to apply it to our entire system in Massachusetts, all 13,500 miles of distribution. That's a fundamental shift in the way I personally have operated and the organization has operated for decades. But we also realized that to see a real shift in the way we approach the program and the benefits that you hope to realize out of this, you really do have to apply it at the system level. To do it in a small regional or district level, you might glean a little bit of information out of it, but really, are you going to determine if you move the needle that much? So we took the dive, the leap of faith, and we did a proof of concept on our entire system. And as a result, it was it was an actionable, full-blown FY22 work plan for us. I Other drivers behind this, I mentioned the contractors and resources and prices. We talked about reliability earlier. The number of events that we're seeing. We were seeing our tree-related events climbing over the years. In addition, we also have our regulatory requirements. I talked about our reliability metrics, in particular, our safety in Sadie in Massachusetts, for example, and those glide path metrics that drop every 3 years. Our worst performing feeders, it seems to be getting tougher and tougher to make sure that we're addressing those in a timely manner on behalf of our customers. And then we talked about it, 2.5 years in a pandemic, or hopefully coming out of a pandemic, increased customer demand on reliable service. A lot of people working from home, they expect that. So that's really some of the steps that got us to where we are today. So with that, we'll move on to really what is our journey about. If I can click these in. All right. So our journey, right? One, we want to create efficiencies. How do we leverage our data? All utilities have it. In fact, we have a lot of it. Data is an asset and something we should be using, and it's very powerful information that we can leverage. The key is bringing the various data sets together where we can have an output that is actionable and the stakeholders can have confidence in it. Not just me and my team, but all the way down to the field forester, right? We have a good grasp of our tree density on our systems in all 3 states, but really only at the operating district level. We have it at the state level. We also have it at the district level. But we don't have really a good grasp on the granular level, right? So if we want to look at district level, for example, not district level, but circuit level, or even span level, right? We didn't have that. The IVMS solution that AI Dash brings to the table enables us to get that granular vegetation density and encroachment down to the span level, a real key asset in data. We also want to optimize and scale efficiencies. We want to be able to apply this approach, optimization at different scales, from diagnosing individual circuits, applying it to a district or region, or the entire state operating company or companies, right? We want to layer in the technology on specific programs, whether it's our maintenance pruning program, our hazard tree program, our enhanced veg management and resiliency program, or any ad hoc auxiliary programs that we have or any other utility might have. Also, we want to reinvest our efficiencies. We have a clear plan regarding the benefits we realize from a monetary perspective, right? We have the data and insights on how we can move the performance needle from a reliability aspect. We can articulate how that is done and share that with our executives. As a result, we have a commitment to reinvest in efficiencies back into our veg management program and not the company's bottom line or be diverted to another electric program. That's a real win for us. So the Vmo platform, again, the AI-IVMS solution is a key part of this, but the Vmo platform really is a digital platform that leverages a lot of different legacy systems as well. So we developed this by identifying really 3 MVPs, or minimum viable product features. One is a cycle prune manager. That's your mileage program that you do every year for maintenance. Also, our hazard risk manager, right? Prioritization of hazard tree inspection and removals. And then we also have our business performance and value tracking dashboards, and I'll talk about that as well. The proof of concept focused mainly on the cycle prune aspect of things, right? We're also starting to weave in our hazard tree risk manager as part of this as well within the IVMS solution, and trying to leverage additional attributes such as AHPs, or areas of high probability. This is a feature that comes out of IVMS that we've coined. And what it does is it identifies polygons or pockets on the circuit that exhibit high potential risk of hazard trees. So when we do our hazard tree program on National Grid, we usually start at the breakers at the station. We work out to protection device to 500 customers. Beyond that, we usually approach that in other different ways, whether it's from our local resources or some other ad hoc approach. What the AHPs do for us is when we're identifying, say, a worst performing feeder, working on that, we're doing the hazard tree mitigation out to that 500 customer threshold. We can look at the IVMS solution and identify AHPs to say, where out further on the circuit do we have these polygons, right? And how many, and what is the distance, and what is the customer impact? And really what it does is it gives us insight to how we can move the needle on the performance of that circuit, and even at the system level as well. So we have business rules that we set up as part of this, and it can vary based on your objectives. And we set out clear objectives for ourselves, and we apply this perhaps a little differently than maybe the company that Jordan mentioned earlier, Entergy. So it really does come down to what is your system needs and what are your objectives. So we talked about the MVP, we talked about the cycle prune a little bit, we talked about the hazard tree, and then we have the dashboards, right? And what the dashboards do for us is they give insight to how do we know how we're doing. So really we built a couple dashboards for different purposes. The business performance dashboard really provides us regulatory grade reliability input on each circuit level, the system level as well, but each circuit level. And it also does for us is it highlights those worst performing feeders that we've determined at the start of the year. So what that does is kind of puts a flag on the side on the dashboard. So anybody who's in there, whether it's myself, anybody from my team, veg ops folks in the field, when they go into this dashboard, they can see what is the area's concern and how the system's performing. In addition, they can click on a circuit, they can open up all the events on that circuit, very clear and concise, and they can see all the tree-related stuff. In addition, they can also see whether there's other causes. Do we have motor vehicle accidents? Is there deteriorated equipment events that occurred there? So it just gives our stakeholders insight to the performance and the impacts on that specific circuit that they may be interested in. The Redzone Report is a byproduct of that business performance dashboard as well. And what the Redzone does is it tracks the circuits based on when they were last pruned from a maintenance standpoint. And what that does, it allows us to keep an eye on circuits to say, okay, once the circuit gets out 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, maybe 4 years, 5 years out, how does it perform? And we have expected thresholds of events. Now, this is based on a maintenance prune perspective. So what we're looking at is impacts from lengthening the maintenance prune time frame. And what that is usually limb issues. So we're focusing on what are the limb issues that cause events. Now, if it has a tree, maintenance pruning really for us is not going to alleviate hazard trees. So we look at that a little bit differently. But for this, it really identifies the performance of each circuit on the system and how they're performing X years after the last time we did pruning. If we see something that starts to creep up out of that threshold, out of that box, we can look at it, we can apply remediation, put into a mitigation plan, move it up in the pruning program. Maybe we apply it to our hazard tree program or some other ad hoc approach. So it really just gives us pretty, I don't want to say real time, but near time analysis on each circuit. And then we also have the value tracking dashboard. And what this does, this talks about how the system's performing from a reliability standpoint, and then also tracks the cost efficiencies that we're realizing from our VMO approach. So this could be viewed at the manager level, executive level, or beyond if we want. So this has a real attribute for our upper management. So let's talk about some results. So when we wanted a proof of concept, we set out an objective that we wanted an actionable work plan at the IVMS system. And that actionable work plan was potentially going to be a reduced work volume, but the right work for our fiscal year 22. We set up expectations with AI Dash and internally to say, all right, we're going to do this proof of concept. We're going to identify a maintenance pruning work plan. And our expectation is we are going to maintain reliability based on our benchmark or improve it. But at the very minimum, we want to maintain. And what these two graphs articulate is, as you can see, we have several years here of tree impacts on our system for Massachusetts. And on the tree events, you can see in 2019, we were creeping up to 42.2% of all events were tree related. 2020, we were over 50%, 50.3%. Once we implemented the IVMS solution as part of our VMO platform, we dropped that down to 39.7%. As you look on the graph on the right, tree customers impacted, it tells a very similar story. Again, 2019 at 36.2, 2020 again up to 54.4, and 2021 back down to 38%. Now keep in mind, this is strictly results from a maintenance pruning program. We have years and years of data. We monitor our pruning programs in the year after performance. We monitor our hazard tree program in the year after performance. And this actually aligns with what our expectations are. We don't see, on National Grid, we don't see a huge gain in reliability from a pruning standpoint, but we do see on our hazard tree program, of course, our storm resiliency program. That's where we see it. But I just want to level set the expectations on the cycle prune program, the maintenance prune program, that this met our expectations. So another way to look at this is let's normalize the reliability performance, right? Because storms, minor, major are usually excluded, but minor storms, gray days, they can really influence performance. So how do we know? We just didn't have really a great weather year in 2021. So what we did is we normalized the information using, again, IEEE 1366 methodology. And what it does is it removes the abnormal days and you're able to compartmentalize that from the normal days. And again, our baseline set is, on a safety perspective, is 0.3 from tree related, and we were able to maintain that performance. So it's just another way to do a check and balance on how your system is performing from a reliability standpoint. Really important.
Bert, one thing to add here that I think would be important to dive into is in that initial first year in Massachusetts, you guys did do some shifting on that cycle prune plan that you're implementing across the state from some of the insights that we leveraged from IVMS. Is that correct? Yeah,
that's correct. We did look at the work plan for our fiscal year 2022, and we compared that against our time-based strategy, right? So we lined up all the circuits, and we had about an 80% overlap. But at the end of the day, it was about 400 miles less. So that kind of leads us into also coming up into the cost benefits on the next slide. But there was still a lot of alignment, right? Because a lot of the algorithms behind the scenes that AI uses is based on tree growth, tree encroachment, tree density, right? So if you prune something that was 5 years ago, it's logical to think that your encroachment is going to be, worst case scenario for the most part since your last prune. So that makes sense. But what was interesting, though, we had some circuits that would have been on the plan. They didn't need it, right? So those get pushed out not just a year, and they may get pushed out even 2 years. So there's definitely some lessons learned and really some validation that we did in the field to verify that, which it was refreshing to see that it aligned very well. So we talked about the reliability aspects. Let's touch on the monetary. So, I mentioned efficiencies earlier, and I call them efficiencies for a reason. I don't call them savings because a lot of times I find that when our finance folks hear about savings, they want a handout, right? How can we bring that money back into the business, right? Whether it's to the bottom line or some other program or demonstrate it as savings to the shareholder or something like that. So we call efficiencies because we have the commitment that we reinvest these dollars back into the program. So as you can see, FY22, we finished our FY22 the end of March, so a month and a half ago, almost 2 months ago. So these dollars, these efficiencies are real. They're realized. So we did the proof of concept in FY22 in Massachusetts, and we were able to realize about a $2 million efficiency. And again, these efficiencies got reinvested back into the veg management program. Our FY23, which we're a month and a half into it now, the way we do our resourcing for our cycle pruning program or our maintenance pruning program, that process is done almost in a year in advance. So we know exactly what those costs are for our entire fiscal year 23. So those, again, are realized benefits. In New York, because we did apply VMO approach to New York at 2.2 million, in Massachusetts at 2.5 million. So substantial dollars. In addition, we're also looking at optimizing some of the hazard tree spend even further. I talked about the HPs or the areas of high probability, and we identified some potential savings on that. Efficiencies. And we're able to reinvest those back into the program as well. So these are real dollars that the veg management team can realize, and we can apply that back into the program on behalf of our customers. So it's a real big win for the group. Now, on the right, this is kind of more along the lines of what our executives are looking for, right? They also want to see other tangible benefits. Reduced outage costs, less truck rolls, really important. It's a lot of money. And then obviously we talked about reliability benefit. What is reliability on safety or SAIDI, for example? And we have projected benefits on those in the 3 to 5% range. As we continue to unlock value, add more features, which I'll touch on in a little bit at a high level, we're able to unlock additional value. We're coming up with use cases to apply to VMO. So speaking of use cases, here's an example of some of the work we've done with AI Dash on reinvestment for those realized dollars or efficiencies that we're able to glean from our VMO platform. So one aspect is anything that we can reinvest, we typically reinvest in hazard tree, right? Because as I mentioned, we track hazard tree mitigation on individual circuits, and we're able to track the reliability benefits as a result. So we know what those benefits are. So now we went to AI Dash and said, hey, what if we invest $1 million, $2, $3, $4, $5 million extra? What circuits should we be focusing on? Most likely worst performing feeders if you're in Massachusetts, but in other states may not be worst performing feeders, they may not apply. What AI Dash did for us is they actually helped us do projections based on CIs avoided and reliability improvement. And this actually played a very important role very recently because we made a case to increase some investment or increase our spend and efforts on hazard trees in Massachusetts for our worst performing feeders. So this played a pivotal role in allowing the team to articulate the need for this and justify it. And as a result, we were able to obtain several millions of dollars in hazard tree work and tree spend, which is a real win. So as you can see, there's definitely an improvement in having that information. You're able to make the case and get the results. One interesting aspect that we learned for our system, now this may not apply to everybody's system, but there is actually a point for us in Massachusetts where we actually saw diminishing returns. So if you throw $10 million, $20 million on us to spend, it doesn't mean we're going to get benefit equally across the system. Eventually you get to a point where you start touching circuits that are performing relatively well. So you really can't move the needle that much. And we saw that based on an incremental spend of roughly $6 million to $7 million. Because keep in mind, we're spending millions of dollars in hazard tree work today. This is on top of that. So it was a very interesting realization that we found that there is a point of diminishing returns. Again, beyond 7 million, there's certainly a benefit, but it isn't nearly as much as it was for that first 5 or 6 million that we analyzed. So just an interesting takeaway, an interesting data point. So VMO, we are really on what we call VMO 1.0, or what I discuss as VMO 1.0. We are now working on VMO 2.0. And what is 2.0? It's really a lot of different use cases that we want to apply. We have a product that we've built in-house called Viper. It's really our end-to-end vegetation management tool, both for distribution and transmission, right? So we want to weave Viper into the system. It already is part of VMO. It already has connectivity to AI Dash's IVMS solution. We already have APIs into our IDS reliability information, into our dashboards. We have those built, but then our Viper we're thinking about how can we improve that, right? Give it a refresh, make it the user experience even better, easier. So those are things we're thinking about. In addition, digitizing a lot of the processes that our field folks use, whether it's the permission and hazard trees, the forms that go along with that, customer contact data. How can we have that at the ready? Because right now, our resources in the field use a lot of different ways to find that information. How can we streamline that to make it easier? In addition, we want to acquire and digitize property line data within the VMO system. This is really important on our transmission as we look at transmission as part of VMO 2.0. And what parts of the transmission program can we apply to this? Having that property line data, having easement data, that's a big win if we can have that at the ready. Because right now, find that information takes a little time, takes some outreach to other departments within the organization. So those are just a couple of use cases we're thinking about. The opportunities are really abundant, and we're going to explore every one. We have a great VMO team that's helping us with this, building this out. We have some great architectural engineers working with us, and I'm frankly surprised where we are today versus day one we did the POC. We have come leaps and bounds, and I'm thoroughly pleased with the team, what we've accomplished to date. As I mentioned, a time-based cycle approach pruning plan for your system is a best management practice, but this is a new best management practice. And I'm excited about what the future holds.
Great. Thanks, Bert. At this point, I think we want to open it up for some questions. I know we have some in the queue. So, Rebecca, if you want to take over and tell us what we have.
Hi, this is Teresa. I'll take over on those questions. So, yeah, we have quite a few in the queue, and I'll just remind the audience, if you have questions and you haven't put them in the queue yet, feel free to go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to open up the questions, and we're going to get started. I don't want to waste any time. All right, so our first question says, how did you get internal support for your program?
Yeah, no, great question. So our company, right about the time we started looking at identifying, a solution for optimization, our company really started looking at what are some digital tools that we can apply within our company to make us more nimble on behalf of our customers. And once they got an idea that we were looking at this optimization approach, they quickly threw it into their digital initiative protocol, right? We've built a team around it with a project manager. Torrin O'Leary is our project manager, does an exceptional job. Like I said, we have architectural engineers. We have a number of people, user experience people that are working with our stakeholders in the veg management team. So as a result, they're funding the resources internally for this and allowing us the time and effort to build this out. Again, the VMO is really just one digital solution among several that the company is working on, has developed and gone live with. So really the company has fully embraced leveraging digital assets and digital tools to make our business more robust and more efficient, frankly.
All right, thank you, Bert. So the next one, Jordan, I think this one's for you. It says, what are some other utility use cases you're seeing for satellite technology?
Yeah, great question. So as you can imagine, even currently in the state of that multispectral imagery bands that we're leveraging, this could be applicable into so many different use cases. So for example, encroachment change detection monitoring for gas and transmission pipelines. So where we're not just concerned about vegetation, but ultimately, are there construction things going on? Is there some land displacement, erosion? All of that could be measured. We get into some sustainability topics too. So can we measure that biodiversity? Can we quantify and verify the health in different types of habitats? As well as what Bert kind of alluded to in storm modeling. So if we understand the current vegetation conditions on the network and we model a storm impact, can we actually predict where that's going to be? Where should we stage crews and how much mutual aid should we request prior to an event? One of the really interesting things, too, as we get into 2024, when the 10-centimeter imagery and the hyperspectral bands become impossible, asset inspection is going to be completely unlocked. So actually looking at the pole, at the hardware, is there rust, corrosion, thermal bands for hotspots, and things like that.
All right, perfect. So here's another question that says, how essential is LiDAR data for vegetation management? I don't know who wants to take that first, but you guys
Bert, you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at that. So it really comes down to what is the objective you're trying to accomplish, right? So LiDAR is really important. National Grid uses the LiDAR. We use it every year. It's a key part of our program. It really comes down to, what are you trying to accomplish? So we use LiDAR on our NERC applicable lines in New England for transmission, right? And to monitor our encroachment and utilize it also as a means of annual reviews of our assets. A satellite improves, like Jordan talked about early on in the presentation, it very well could replace LiDAR. Am I prepared to replace it today? No, not quite, but we are keen to keep an eye on it. So it really comes down to, how are you applying the technology? I guess that's the short answer I have.
All right, perfect. Okay, we have another one that says, who is the VMO solution geared toward? As in, who are the end users and what have been the experiences in adopting or embracing the analytics side?
Yes, so the VMO solution is really geared to our entire vegetation management team, right? So I lead the veg strategy group, but we're not just doing this in a silo. We engage with our directors from our veg management delivery folks, both the field folks as well, because they all have a part in this, right? They all have needs that they need addressed. So really, it is a group effort. In addition, we also leverage our IT folks. A lot of times, People in utilities curse our IT colleagues. Sometimes people think they may not be responsive. In this case, they've been exceptional. They've been really responsive to this. So with that, I think that just creates a better atmosphere, better relationship too, as well within the organization to get things done. But the answer to the question though, our stakeholders that use this on a day-to-day basis is our entire veg management team.
Okay, great. The next one says, do you see the use of drones as a realistic value add in the vegetation management space? So
with drones, we did a POC with drones on our transmission network, I guess about 4 or 5 years ago now. And really the POC that we did on our system was a mimic of how we do our LiDAR program, right? We wanted to capture certain lengths of different voltages, different topographies, geographies, and then we also wanted deliverables that were the same. And at the end of the day, things took a little longer to get. A couple key takeaways was the line of sight issue, and I know there's ways to overcome that and soon to overcome that. But that was one drawback. The other thing that we realized through the POC using drones from a LiDAR acquisition point of view was the cost, order of magnitude cost as compared to, say, fixed wing or even rotary for that matter. But drones do have a role in veg management. You can use those for inspections of areas that may be inaccessible on foot or ATV or motorized vehicle for that matter. So it really comes down to again, what is the objective you're trying to accomplish? At National Grid, we have licensed pilots within our organization. We have drones within our organizations, I believe, but we don't really use drones on the veg management program today. Not to say we won't in the future. So again, it depends on what your use case is and your objective is trying to accomplish.
Okay. All right, let's see what else we have here. It says, how often do you run the VMO model for monitoring the vegetation? Is it annually, more often, less often?
Yes, so the way we organize that with AI Dash is we acquire satellite imagery twice a year. So we're acquiring it this month, actually. I think we've already acquired it. Jordan, correct me if I'm wrong. And then we also acquire it in the fall, just before leaf off as well. So what that helps us, gives us more snapshots of the condition of the system as well. And allows us also to get better idea on tree growth you can go back and you can task archived information, but if we can get it twice a year, we can get that information even fresher. Which is great. So the VMO is tasking the satellite twice a year. The connectivity in VMO with respect to reliability, work plan statuses, and things like that, that's ongoing, goes back and forth. Those are APIs that are in place, and those are updated fairly frequently.
All right. So here's another question that maybe kind of relates to that one. It says, do you foresee further deviation away from cycle-based maintenance as you become more comfortable with VMO?
On distribution, I do, absolutely do. Optimizing your approach on your distribution system, I think is a right move. Now, as we work on VMO 2.0 and we start looking at our transmission system, I want to be careful on how we apply that. For one, on your sideline hazard tree piece, absolutely. I think there's certainly an application there. When it comes to your floor work, though, one of our key tools on our floor is herbicides, right? And it's low volume foliar. That's been a staple of our vegetation management program on our transmission network for probably 50 years. If we play with that too much, in other words, we lengthen cycles or something of that nature, it could really impact the ability to use some of those tools, right? Because vegetation height gets too tall. In Massachusetts, we actually have a threshold of what you can actually foliar treat. I believe it's 10 or 12 feet. Anything over that, you have to cut it. So again, it depends on how you apply it, where you can apply it. One thing that we are going to try to leverage on 2.0, VMO 2.0, and in the IVMS solution is better identification of the right tools on the corridor floor, right? Where can we mow maybe in a year in advance so we get the conditions just right to do a follow-up foliar application to control the vegetation in a more efficient and long-term way. So those are some of the things we're thinking about.
All right. So here's another one. It says, how are your tree trim cycles affected by different tree species and their varying growth rates? Does satellite imagery help with this?
Jordan, you want to take a stab at that first?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love for you to build on it too from your experience, Bert. But ultimately, when we think about varying growth rates and different species applications, this is where satellite imagery and satellite technology really shines. Because we're leveraging 3 to 5 years back, we are measuring and observing every single pixel of vegetation across that network. That gets fused with climate data. So what was the precipitation rates? What did we look like? Were we in a drought year, or was this a pretty standard year? So we can help understand how is that exact tree, regardless of species, behaving in the environment that it's in. And what that gives you is a much more accurate growth rate versus then just saying, this is a fast growing species because it's Bradford pear versus a red oak. So we're getting that granular, actually observed growth rate, not just taking some broad-based approach. So ultimately, the growth rates that we leverage from satellite technology are much more accurate than just taking some type of species-based approach. Bert, feel free to add.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So on the length of pruning intervals in tree species, it does play a role here. For example, we're not going to prune circuits in, say, Albany, New York, the same amount of time and intervals as we will in, say, Watertown, New York, right? The hardening zone is different. The growth rates are different. So this gives us insight to say, hey, is that correct, right? Because we have, from a time-based approach, we did adjust those cycles to accommodate for that. But was it right? So what's nice about the IVMS solution is it actually verifies, those time frames from prune to prune and whether those intervals are correct. So that's a nice attribute to have and have that confidence.
All right. Well, we have another one here about satellites, and it says, does the canopy above wires or cloud cover reduce the effectiveness of satellite capture?
Yeah, I could take that one. So kind of a two-part question. So number one, I'll kind of talk about the clouds. So earlier in the presentation, we talked about SAR, or synthetic aperture radar. So when we task satellites, if we do detect that there's cloud cover, we oftentimes will go back and get SAR imagery. So clouds are not relevant. We can pierce right through them. We can even task these satellites at night if so needed to get the same amount of accurate imagery. So clouds are not a factor. And when we think about canopy cover, as I kind of brushed over earlier, we're using a process called stereoscopic acquisition. So as these satellites are in orbit across Earth, we're taking multiple photos of the same area on the area of interest, rather, at the same point on Earth. So with that, we're able to triangulate up. Now, it's not just one linear pattern. Oftentimes, we're tasking northern orbits, southern orbits, and we're trying to get that 360-degree angle of views. So whether that's coming down, whether that's coming from the side, to pierce through those canopies. So generally speaking, when we think about tree canopy or severe overhang, that's not that much of a factor because we're piercing together all these different angles to try to figure out what that radial clearance is. So for example, Bert, I think across the entire national grid system, the areas that we were not able to penetrate due to severe overhang or severe canopy cover was equivalent to about 2% across the network between New York and Massachusetts. So when we do encounter some of that, if you can imagine the silver maple that's completely engulfed, and even if you're standing there, you wouldn't be able to figure out the radial clearance, the same thing is going to apply to satellite, and we treat that as a separate risk category. But ultimately, we are trying to get every angle to see through and not just from above.
All right. We have a question here. It says, does the AI tool, is it equipped with data across the world or only in the US?
Great question. So our specific model has been trained on millions of miles of T&E corridors. We're currently deployed on about 500,000 miles. We're currently live on 5 of 7 continents. So we are not just a US-based company. Our model has been trained on different diverse climates and environments. So whether that's a rainforest type environment, whether that's a desert type environment, as we go overseas and look at Europe, UK, and even in the Middle East, we do have deployments in various areas. So the model is trained to understand exactly what we're looking at, not just specifically what we're going to find in North America.
All right. Okay, well, we're running out of time, but I think we have time for this one last question, and it's again about AI-Dash's tool. It says, does AI-Dash have these tracking dashboards that can be leveraged?
Absolutely. So within IVMS, we custom build exactly a reporting dashboard that's going to be catered to your needs. So whether this is for regulatory compliance, something similar that Bert reviewed too is for tracking reliability, all of these can be customized and built within the solution. Bert and National Grid have taken a very, very in-depth stance to incorporate different legacy information for different segments of the business, not just from IVMS and satellite imagery, but we do have the capacity to integrate with those and build something custom for you within the solution alone.